Ready? Okay, the Buzzkillers here, Kathy Lundeen and Sandy Hartnett. We're with our two finance committees, Chairman John Ladik and Mark Vasapolli. They're going to give us a little introduction to themselves. We're going to talk about Proposition 2.5 and some other things along the way, but take it away, you two.
Okay, I'll start off first. I started on the Finance Committee back in, I think it was 2014. I was just interested in seeing how our tax dollars were being spent. Just a little bit of background. We've lived in Pepperell since 1983, so that's like 36 years. My children have gone through parts of the school system. My son went through school from grade, I believe it was 4 through 12, and my daughter went from kindergarten to 8. So we're familiar with the schools, even though that's a very long time ago. If you've gone to any of the town meetings, you know I'm sort of jumping on the school budget quite a bit because I think that is one of the reasons we're in the situation that we're in. But I am not against education at all. I think it's one of the most important things we can do, and it's really the only way our kids have a way of going forward. When I say that, I paid for my kids to both go to college. They both have master's degrees. So that part I think is important for people to know, that I am not against education. I am just against the fact that I think their budget is a little bit out of control when you compare it to what our resources are. And the situation that we're in right now is because, at least from my tracking the past 5 years, their budget has grown significantly faster than the town can afford. And at each point we've been dipping into free cash to pay for that. And this year we've come to the situation where if we want to balance our budget, we have to use just about every penny we have in free cash. And that really is not the way to go. So we're faced with an override. And one of the things I did want to address, I've been reading some of the comments on social media, and I don't think people understand everything that's been going on with the budget. I see comments saying, oh, we have override after override after override. We had 2 attempts at an override back in about 2014 and both failed. So the only override I can remember was probably 20 years before that, and that one failed as well. So we have not had this tremendous amount of overrides. What we have had are debt exclusions, and those are like long-term loans. Examples are buying the fire truck. The ladder truck is one. We're paying a debt on a current fire engine. I think that's going to be up in a couple of years. We're also paying a large amount of money for the new high school, and we're paying for the repairs on the schools in Pepperell. And the other towns likewise are paying for repairs to their schools as well. So those are things that you folks, the voters, have approved. So that does not count towards the usual tax rate that we pay for our real estate, even though that's rolled into it. And what we're faced with now is a Proposition 2.5 override of about $1.5 million. And that will balance the budget, allow us to maintain some free cash, and expand some of the capital purchases. I'll turn it over to Mark, and he could add what he thinks I left out,
Right.
which is probably
That's
a lot.
No, we'll come back to you, John. Mark Vasapolli, been a resident in town for 17 years. We've got two children in the school system. One's in the middle school, 7th grader. I've got one that will be graduating from the Neshoba Tech. And also moved my business. I'm a local business owner. I moved my business up here about 15 years ago, so understand the business community in town. So, you know, taking off what John was saying, I've been on this finance committee for now 3 years, and looking over the different budgets, we have an opportunity to sit down with each department head. We get to see where they're spending their money, and you know, over the past 3 years of being on the finance committee, I can see how they're being as efficient as they can possibly be. And when you really look at the town of Pepperell, paying a lot in that aspect, but as we all realize, it's more expensive to live today when you have children in school, and it's just expensive. And as John mentioned, most of the tax increases in the last few years haven't been from overrides. It's from us actually approving debt exclusions. Debt exclusions are added to your tax bill, and that increases your tax bill every year, plus the fact that you are going up by 2.5%. So our tax bills when we moved here 17 years ago is obviously more today than it was then from those things. But the effect of getting debt overrides is because we don't have a proper capital management plan. And what we're saying about that is that over the last even more than 3 years, the past 5 or 10 years, the town has made up on their budget by using certain amounts of free cash. There's been some years that we've had windfalls of free cash. There was a few years back that we collected over $1 million in back taxes. That actually helped us get through a number of years. But what most people don't realize is when you use free cash towards your general budget, what happens is those general budget items that you pay for cash this year get on your general budget next year. So we can't necessarily rely on free cash to make up our budget, and that's what we've been doing. And in that aspect, by increasing our general budget, the amount of capital that we bring in, it's going to allow us to put together a proper capital plan to invest. I mean, you can drive around town and you will see, our public safety buildings are old. If any of you have ever gone down to the DPW and you see the vehicles and the equipment that we have are very old. So in order to fund these items, we need to have a capital plan. And currently right now, everybody's learning to lean and mean. We all want a vibrant library. We all want probably a bigger community center and a place to have our children have a summer program and have those type of programs for them. So as John has mentioned, we look at the school budget every year, and if they're constantly coming in at rates that are 4.5% over 5%, then what ends up happening is that slowly squeezes what we have for our general government budget for us. And so over the years, they've become a bigger part of our budget. And that we've worked with the schools, and we constantly sit with them, and they work with us, but they really need to come down to be in a level that we are running our town at. If we can get the school budget down to those levels, and we can fall within the 2.5%, then what we can do is we really can have a budget where we can actually fund some things. But right now, what we need is if you want to call it a kickstart in that direction. We're going to need to work with the schools, but we need the funds to be able to move forward. And providing the resources of an override will give us that opportunity to move forward, properly fund capital, and keep funding our public safety, our DPW, and the operations at Town Hall and other departments around town. So I don't know, John, if there's something else we're really missing, but I mean, that's part of what I see that we need to move forward. We can't, one of the finance committee members made a comment, it was Clinton, he said, we can't cut our way to prosperity. You can't keep cutting. I mean, right now, there's, taking one employee from any department, it hurts all departments. So our town administrator is doing a great job. We're not playing favors on any department, but any person that is eliminated affects our town and our services. And, schools are trying to do their job, but at the same time, if we provide more services in our town for our families and our children, then, you won't have people that have to work 2 and 3 jobs. And so we can provide those services by properly placing our money in the right places. And so we're working with the schools right now, and hopefully that they can come into tune with us. We encourage everybody, to be more informed. And, this buzzkiller is really helping people, is that we encourage people to be more informed. Maybe talk to school committee members and find out what they see and what are they voting on at the school level. I mean, we have representation there at the school committee, and so we should know who those people are and encourage them that this is what Pepperell really wants, and not to settle for less, because that does make a big part of our budget. And so those are important things that why we're encouraged to support this override to get us going in the right direction. No one wants to pay more taxes. I surely don't. I pay water sewer bills just like anyone else, and the stormwater expenses, and it doesn't make things easy, but we have to do it. And so we want a place for our children to grow up in a nice neighborhood. So I don't know if there's something I'm missing, John, in regards to.
I just want to add a couple of things. One is, without the override, as we had the meeting with the selectmen last Monday, Right now, we're gonna lose 3 full-time employees. One is police department, one is, I believe, an ambulance EMT person, one person from the highway, and there's gonna be also 5 cuts to part-time employees, and part-time employees work anywhere from 10 to 19 hours because they do not get benefits. And one of those cuts may not be a person per se, but it's gonna be towards the library. They're gonna be closed one of the evenings. What that means for them, it's more than just a few hours where the door is closed. They're gonna have to apply for a waiver from the state. It's probably a good chance they will get the waiver. I'm sort of guessing this because that's happened in the past. But if they don't get the waiver, then they lose their accreditation. And if you go into the library and try to borrow a book, they have no way to borrow books from other libraries. So for those people that like to go to the library, I think that's important. The other cut may be towards somebody at the senior center, and that might reduce some of the services that they have. And obviously, you know what happens if you don't have a police person, and you know what happens if you don't have a highway. Your roads may take a little bit longer to get plowed, or some holes may take a little bit longer to get filled. And I think you understand what happens if you don't have enough people to support the ambulance service. Those are just cuts that people are gonna have to be faced with if the override does not pass. If the override does pass, one of the things to keep in mind is the town is not growing in terms of personnel. We're keeping everybody that we have. I think in Andrew's budget, the only thing he might do is add about 1 hour per week to one person to help with some extra paperwork. So that's the only growth that would come about over the override. We're not building empires in the town hall, nor with any of the other departments. Somebody asked about the enterprise funds and how those line up with the budget. You can think of the town budget with town hall, highway, police as being one organization, and the enterprise funds, that would be water and sewer, transfer station, I think stormwater is an enterprise fund now. Those are like individual businesses. So if they have increased costs, they have to pass those on to the consumers, those folks that use the transfer station or have water and sewer. Everybody has to pay for the stormwater fee. So when we talk about the override and Proposition 2.5, it does not affect those organizations at all. They are all self-sustaining, and they develop their budget based on their costs and the number of people that they serve.
Okay.
You know, I want to add something as far as the override. Someone had mentioned a comment recently in some meetings, is that if we approve an override, how long is that going to last? Are we going to be asking the town of Pepperell in next year for another override, or in 2 or 3 years for an override? It's, you know, when you look at that and say, if we maintain communication, and we work very sternly with the school departments and the school budget, and we can keep them within that 3%. You know, first let me mention that, you know, Pepperell's growth is averaged about 0.75%. So at 2.5% plus a 0.75% growth, we're looking at 3.25% that we have to work with as a finance committee. So if we can keep people's budgets below that level, so if we can talk to the schools and work with them over the next year, and they can maintain the budget below those levels of 3%, and the town has been very efficient to do that on our side, then, you know, this could be a situation where it could last many years, that we properly fund capital and put money aside for those capital items. Then what happens is we don't necessarily need to look for these maybe small capital items. We don't need to get loans and add debt overrides. We don't need to increase taxes in another override, because we can maintain that budget in that level. That's not to say that if we have an economic shift, that all of a sudden that a town needs to come up with money, or they need to borrow money for a certain extremely large item. If you want to improve public safety, you know, those type of items, if you want a new public safety building, obviously those become maybe something that town has to work with. So there in one aspect, there's not a real answer. Do we ask, will it be 5 years down the road that you need something like this, or 10 years? As John mentioned earlier, it's been 20 years and we have not approved an override. So we're still here today, and we haven't approved it, but at this point, where we're at, this would be a huge advantage to Pepperell moving forward.
Can you put a dollar amount on the tax bill of the average
Well, when you look at the
citizen?
tax bill, you say the average home in Pepperell is, values about $335,000 is the average home value. So if your home currently is worth around that level, your tax bill is probably gonna change by about $200. And, you know, with the 2.5%, you're probably gonna go up about $160 anyways, $165. So at that level is 200. So that's obviously if you're a homeowner and you have a property worth, you know, 500,000-600,000, your tax bill is gonna go up relatively to that. So, you know, a $200 increase to provide all these services is, you know, you can equate that to maybe $15 or $16 a month. I know any little bit amount of increase is significant to everybody, but, you know, it's not a lot of money in that regards when you break it down to be able to provide this and really put a plan together going forward. So
Is that based on the schools coming in at 5%?
based on what levels we're at right now, which is the schools are coming in, we've got it leveled at what, 5% at this point in the
Yes,
budget?
right.
It's that's based on,
But if they came in at 2.5, 3, or even 4, that would go down.
It's possible
Or
it would
maybe-
go down, but one of the things
Yeah.
that we're really hurting with is capital items.
right,
So there's a list that's about $12 billion long.
right.
So if we had a little extra money, it would probably go to fund some of the capital improvements. A couple of things people may not realize is there's not been a lot of maintenance on the town buildings. The town hall's had some work. The police station needs a lot of work. They still have mold problems, water problems, air conditioning problems. And the fire stations, they also need work, and they need heaters and a few other items. So those are just some of the major items that people talk about.
And what is the best way to fund capital expenditures? Within the budget or an override or debt exclusion when you need to do that?
Right now, we're trying to do it within the budget. There's a certain amount of money we have. We allocate that to capital expenses. If we feel we have some extra money in the free cash, then that will get allocated to capital expenses. Usually, the typical rule of thumb for capital expenses is if they're large purchases and they last 5 years, then you should use free cash to fund those.
Could we have dealt with this before we reached a $12 million need? Was there something,
We did not have the money to pay for anything.
right?
That's the real reason. Our budget has been sort of bare bones since I started back in 2014 or so.
Yeah, you know, we have to realize that all our department heads, they're doing a tremendous job just running the town the way it is with the money that's available to them. They all need certain funds. I mean, we could use more equipment for DPW, the supplies and things that are needed at the police department, at the fire department. We can surely invest more in our community services and recreation. We can invest more in our senior centers. Our population grows to be older. So there's a lot of investments that can be made in our town to really improve the services and make it a community that really people can really be proud of. And not that we're not, I mean, we are proud of Pepperell and it's a great town to live in, but this is a need that we really are looking for.
I'm just gonna go back to the question I asked before. So that school budget, taking 50% more plus out of the general fund, did that contribute to us getting behind on capital purchases, layoffs, working with less personnel over the course of X amount of years?
Yes, I think it was about back in 2014 when we were faced with the override. There were lots of cuts made within the town hall, and if you remember, the town hall was closed actually on Fridays, and that's because we didn't have the staffing for it. And we've been trying to postpone as many large capital investments as possible. One thing, usually when you go out and you buy some piece of equipment, let's say for the highway department, you purchase it. So let's say you need a front end loader, it costs maybe $250,000. We haven't had the money, so what we've been doing is actually doing lease payments. Because that allows us to get new equipment, but now we're faced with paying that off over 4 or 5 years, and that means that money cannot be used for new purchases in those 5 years. It's already spoken for.
I don't mean to rag on the schools,
Mm.
but I think perhaps, well, I
Yeah.
think perhaps the time has come
Yeah.
where they have to be more of a team player. Like,
Mhm.
I would like to see them come in at 3% or even
Yes.
2.5%, because I'm not sure we're teaching our
Right.
children a great example of how to run a town
Yes.
and how not to play fairly.
Mhm.
But if we can't negotiate with the union as a town, then I think our school committee somehow needs to know that they have to negotiate with the unions, because that does seem to be a big problem, salaries and everything else, that
Wages.
something has to give.
If you look at the charter for Pepperell, the town itself does not have any control over the school committee, it's the voters who do. So if you really don't like what's going on, then you have to speak to those folks that you elect. That's the only
Mhm.
real input, way of providing input into the school committee. Just check out that org chart in the charter, and you'll see what I'm talking about.
Okay.
And is there room for growth in Pepperell other than generating revenue with property taxes?
Well, one of it is that, you know, that's part of doing a master plan and part of economic development. And those type of plans typically just don't happen overnight. So if we really want Pepperell to move forward and bring more revenue in, then we've got to have that longer term plan. I mean, if you want to develop commercial properties or any type of zoning changes, those are things that don't happen in a few months. Those take a few years. So if you want develop Manhattan downtown and different things, then it could be 3 or 4 or 5 years. But really, without the resources, without properly funding all our departments and having all those services, we can't even remotely even think that way. You know, you want a properly funded police department, you want to have those things. So it's going to attract those businesses, it's going to attract our community center, and that would be really something that to help us grow and think of ideas out of the box that will generate more revenue for our town.
Mm-hmm. And was the finance committee unanimous in the backing of the override?
Yes, 100%.
100%, okay.
I don't have any more questions, do you?
No.
No,
You
No,
have
no,
anything to
Any
add?
closing remarks to?
No, the one thing I do want to say to anybody who reads this, and you could pass it along to all your friends and neighbors, is just become informed about what's going on.
Absolutely.
Please go onto the website, look at the material that Andrew has placed out there. It may not be the easiest reading, but do your best. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to come to our meetings. You can send us emails. To be honest, I'm not quite sure what my email address is at Town Hall, but if you go on the website, I think you will find it. And that's the best. And then just vote basically what you feel is the right thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
thank
thank
you.
you so much,
Thank
thank
you.
you.
Yep.